All right. Hello, everyone. I'll give a couple more seconds, but about to start the webinar on Creo Simulation Live. So if you're in this, just a couple seconds to get started. Make sure everything's set up. Okay, cool. So everyone, today's October 28th, and we are doing a webinar on Creo Simulate Live. So let's move over. So what we're going to talk about today is CSL, Creo Simulate Live, structural, modal, and thermal and fluid capabilities. We're going to really focus on the Creo 7 aspect of it. However, as we'll talk about later, this is software that's available in Creos 4, 5, 6, 7 now, and so on and so forth throughout the future. A little bit of housekeeping items, if you want to call them that. You're all muted. It's by design so that no background noise, just hearing me talk about the software. If you have questions, you can put them in the question pane or in the chat. We'll see both of them. We'll be answering those towards the end of the webinar. So that's that. Yeah. So what we're going to talk about today is a brief introduction to myself and Boundary Systems. And then what we're really going to talk about is each of the individual aspects of Creo Simulate Live and how they're incorporated into Creo. So starting off a little bit about myself, my name is Anthony Vetterini. I'm a specialist at Boundary Systems. I have a bachelor's of science and engineering in both aerospace and mechanical engineering. I've spent a good amount of years working with CAD and CAE applications. To get to talk about Boundary Systems, CSL is a technology leader. Our main partner is PTC, but we also partner ourselves with other technology companies. We're based out of Cleveland, Ohio, but as part of the PDSVISION group, we are a part of global companies, which you can see on the map on the right, a bunch of pinpoints of where we're located. In terms of capabilities, we have quite a bit. We help with everything from PLM to CAD design and consulting to simulation. So we have lots of solutions we can provide. Couple more slides about us. Inc. 5000 and Leatherhead 100 we've been noted in. So those are some just notifications by ourselves. Along with our major accreditations, the biggest one being a PTC Platinum Partner. This lets us help out with lots of PTC, with all the PTC related products being, Creo, Parametric, Simulate, Windchill, and all those sorts of softwares that PTC has underneath them. And so to highlight the last thing, we are the PTC Platinum Partner, so that is the main stake thing we help out with, which is PTC products. Along with that, we also have a bunch of other softwares, as you can see towards the bottom of the screen. A couple of them being KeyShot, which is real-life Photoshop rendering, MoldX 3D, which is a mold flow simulation, Cimerix, which is flow analysis, CFD tool solutions, along with all the others on the screen. So there are a good amount of software providers that we partner ourselves with and that we provide solutions for. So to get into Creo Simulate Live, so a little bit of an overview. Creo Simulate Live is a software that comes directly from the PTC partnership with ANSYS, which has been growing over the past couple of years. It is based off the ANSYS Discovery Live software. So this is one of the packages that ANSYS has. If you're not familiar, ANSYS is probably the global leader, if not one of the top 1 or 2, maybe top 3 simulation software providers. This is a strong partnership between the two companies, and it's been growing as we move forward. The big part of the Discovery Live software package is that it allows engineers to see your results immediately when making your design choices. So Creo Simulate Live is meant to be used early on in the design process. So it's not your end goal or final simulation software. That's not what this tool is used for. What this tool does let you accomplish is those early stage simulations. How many cooling fins should I have? Where should I put these ribs? Things of that nature is where this tool can really be very useful. I said earlier, but this tool is available in Creo 4 through Creo 7 as of now. One limitation, I guess if you want to call it that, is that it is GPU based. So you do require an NVIDIA CUDA-enabled graphics card. This is very common amongst engineering workstations in recent years, but it is something to be aware of, is that, again, NVIDIA CUDA-enabled graphics card. And overall, this software is very easy to use. So it's not going to require, a long training course, weeks of training and then application learning. It works pretty quickly. There's a few limitations of what you can do inside of it compared to like a full-fledged simulation software like Creo Simulate. So there's a few limitations, but again, it's just very easy to use and can be used early on in your design process. So the first aspect we're going to talk about is the CSL structural portion. So the big draw to using CSL for structural needs is that you can make those quick design changes to see how they affect your displacement or stress. So, if I increase this fillet, does it increase or decrease my stress? If I move this rib here, how much does that increase or decrease my stress? If I'm working in sheet metal, let's say I add in a punch form, what's that do to my stresses? These things that if you did inside of a full-fledged software like Creo Simulate, all those design changes require you to remesh your model, then rerun the simulation. And so that time adds on very quickly. Inside of Creo Simulate Live, we're going to be seeing these results very quickly, within 10, 15 seconds after you place that new feature or change the feature, you're going to see the results instantaneously. Also, inside of Creo Simulate Live CSL, there's a minimal need to actually defeature your model. So inside of Creo Simulate, a lot of the times you're going to be spending a lot of time defeaturing your model, removing small rounds, getting rid of holes, things of that nature. Inside of Creo Simulate Live, there's a very minimal need to do any of that. For the most part, everything will pretty much mesh and go. It has its own unique mesh, quote unquote. It's a meshless environment, but it still does some internal meshing to actually get results. So there's no need to really defeature your model, and if there is any need, it's very minimal. Probes can be added. These are very similar to measures inside of Creo Simulate. So you can see one on Figure 1, where you can place a probe on a surface, and let's say you can monitor the max stress, von Mises stress. So if you make any design changes, that probe will update, and you'll see your results in real time. Something added in Creo 6.0.2 was the ability to do scope selection. So what that does is for your assembly simulations, this tool can be, this feature can be used to actually define which parts of your assembly you want to see the simulation on. So you can choose what you want to see the simulation on an assembly. Again, easy to add loads and constraints. However, we're limited compared to like Creo Simulate. We don't get all the access to every loading option. So for example, like a bearing load is something that's in Creo Simulate that is not in Creo Simulate Live. So those are all things available in Creo Simulate Live structural for all versions. But inside of Creo 7, there are some specific unique enhancements available to us. One of them being an easier to use legend, which is over in Figure 2. What they did in Creo 7 from Creo 6 is they compacted a bunch of the features into the legend. So you can, for example, change between deformation and stress inside the legend instead of having a whole dialog box for it. If you haven't upgraded to Creo 7, the big thing they added there was multi-body design. So obviously inside of Creo 7, Creo Simulate Live, we have multi-body support. We also have functional constraints inside of Creo 7 structural, where we now have planar constraints, cylindrical or ball constraints. Those are now available to us inside of Creo Simulate Live. We also have the ability to select local coordinate systems, so we can define loads upon specific coordinate systems. Inside of earlier builds of Creo Simulate Live, we were limited to the global coordinate system. Now we can choose. Creo Simulate Live thermal. So again, what the big draw to CSL is we can make changes. So maybe they're geometrical, maybe it's adding cooling fins, or maybe changing the spacing. What we'll be able to do is see the effects of those changes on our heat transfer instantaneously. What's the temperature gradient look like? Things of that nature. Creos 4 to 6 all have steady state response. Inside of Creo 7, though, we have steady state and transient response. So in Creo 7, you could say, hey, between 0 seconds and 3600 seconds, which is an hour, let's look at the cooling of our model. Or between 0 and 2 seconds, what's the heating look like? What's the heat? Is the heat going to reach some sort of maximum early on? And so these are things we can now monitor inside of Creo Simulate Live, being the transient response. We also have modal response. So this lets you see the natural frequencies of your model, and you can animate and see the mode, shape, and animations. Again, this is very nice because you can see these very early in the design process. However, we are limited to the first 6 modes currently. So we won't be able to change that or change the range of them. It's just going to be the very first 6 modes we'll be able to see. And nothing was new added in Creo 7 in relation to Modal. So these are things that are available in all versions of Creo Simulate Live. Lastly, we are going to talk about is the CSL fluid analysis, which is brand new in Creo 7 and is only available in Creo 7 as of now, which is October 2020. Again, this is something where which is quickly implemented to be used by design engineers. So it's not some full-fledged CFD program getting you the most accurate results in the world. There is some error in these values. However, we are able to see the results quickly, and we can just get some general information from it. You'll still be able to see trends of information. The numbers might not be the best in the world, but as you make changes, you'll be able to see the effects. However, as of now, since this is brand new, there's still a couple limitations. The main one is that we're currently limited to transient flow. So if you want to see a steady state response, you're going to have to kind of let the simulation run for a bit to see the response over time. It's going to start at 0 seconds and go on. You'll see it step forward. In Creo 8, they plan to have steady state flow for CSL fluid analysis. So it's coming soon. But right now, we're limited to transient. Also, one note for a question we get sometimes is that, what does CSL solve for? Again, it's part of the ANSYS discovery package, and that portion of ANSYS solves for the Lattice-Boltzmann CFD equations. So that it's not the traditional Navier-Stokes. The Lattice-Boltzmanns are a little bit newer sets of equations that have been found and been used recently, newer relatively compared to Navier-Stokes. In terms of licensing, real quick, we have 2 sets of licenses. We have the Creo Simulation Live license, and that gives you the structural, thermal, modal analyses. Then we also have Creo Simulation Live Plus, which gives you the fluid portion of Creo Simulate Live. And again, that license would be if you're on Creo 7 or plan to be on Creo 7, because that's where fluids are, or where you can do fluid simulations. So that's going to bring us into our demonstration section.
So here we have a snowmobile chassis that we're going to look at for the CSL structural portion of this demonstration. What we're first going to focus on is the single part simulation. So we're going to rotate this and look directly at this component here. So if we open it, we see we have a part, and to get to CSL or Creo Simulation Live, we can click on the Live Simulation tab, which will click open Creo Simulate Live. When we open it, we'll notice that the first thing that we see is the simulation tree is at the top and our model tree is at the bottom on the left-hand side. A structure gets created, so a structural simulation. The study group is always the same, and the groups on the right are groups that are unique to whatever simulation you're in. So if you're in thermal mode, you wouldn't have constraints and loads, you would have boundary conditions and loads. In the study group dropdown, we have a simulation quality slider. In the middle, we have the medium between speed and accuracy. We could drag this either to the left or to the right to get their respective result. One thing to note though is if we drag this all the way to accuracy, it's still just accuracy in terms of Creo Simulate Live. It's not going to make Creo Simulate Live behave as if it was a full-fledged FEA software package. It's still Creo Simulate Live. It's just more accurate in terms of relative to itself. So we're going to leave it in the middle for this and going into model setup here. So we're going to fix, just select the surface and complete the creation. We can click on force to add a force. And to add forces, it's just similar to Creo Simulate. You know, we add some references. We need a coordinate system. And values. And in Creo 7, we get preview geometry or preview simulation entities. So we can actually see a preview of the arrows. Click OK. And we'll see those entities pop up at the direction and magnitude we specified. We're going to add in more loads. So over here. And so we have loads, constraints, and now we can click simulate, and our simulation will start. So first we'll notice it's a dark blue color. That means CSL is calculating, and once we see a colored plot, that will be when our results are ready. And so to talk some more on the right, we have our legend, and we're showing von Mises stress. The units we're using megapascal, and these drop downs are how you can change it. So if we want gigapascal, we can select that. We can turn off continuous tone with this icon down here. We can even show the min and max. So we see our max stress is right here. So the next thing we can talk about is a probe. So these are like measures in Creo Simulate where we can monitor, let's say, the maximum, and it's going to take the current measure we're on, so stress in this case, and it's going to place a probe there. And we can click Save and OK. And if we give it a little bit, it will update with the value. The probes are a little bit later to update. It's waiting for some final calculations from Creo Simulate Live to update the value here. So that's what that is doing. And while it's calculating on the right, we'll talk about the legend. So we can actually change the values here by just double clicking and just typing in values you want. So we'll go 145 and we'll make the min 0. Actually, we'll make it 155. And now we see our legend has finished, so we finished updating. And so we can see the maximum stress at this point. It's about 145.8 megapascal. If we change our measurement, so we're going to look at the deformation right now, and it's in millimeters, we see that our probe stays the same, so it's still just looking for the surface max von Mises stress. While we're here, we have our deformation. In the animate options dialog box, we can start our deformation or our animation. We could increase the speed. We could turn on and exaggerate our scale by using the slider just to exaggerate. So that's some of the animation options we have. Let's go back to von Mises stress though and look at our megapascal. So now really the real benefit to Creo Simulation Live is if we make edits. So if we look down here, we have this stress here. So we could try thickening our rib. So if we deactivate Simulate and resume a feature, we have thickened this wall. And so we're at 145, and now if we click Simulate, Creo Simulate Live will now recalculate out the stresses and report out what our new stress value at this point may be. So we have to give it a little bit of time again for the calculations to finalize and this value to update. So we'll keep giving it some time. like it's still calculating. So just again to show this feature, we could change our values here. And we see our von Mises stress is updated, and we've lowered our stress by making a thicker rib there. So that's an example where CSL can be used in your part workflow as you're editing your part. If you know your stresses on the part you're designing or your loading schemes, you can use Creo Simulate Live to your advantage to make quick design changes on the fly. These can also be made in an assembly setting. So if we turn off Simulate and come back to our full chassis here, and come to live simulation, we see we have this analysis still set up with probes, loads, and constraints. We see that the loads from the part are not carried over. This loading scheme in Creo Simulate Live is unique to our assembly. And so if I click on Simulate here and give it a few moments to run, it will run. It does take a little bit longer on our assembly levels, but it will work. And if you think about it, it is still very quick. We have all these small rounds and small holes on these parts. And inside of Creo Simulate Live, we actually don't have to go in and defeature it. We'll just be able to see our results. So again, it's running, and we give it a few moments. And we see our results. Very quick, very fast for us. And similarly, you know, the nice thing about Creo Simulate Live is it's automatic. It recalculates as it sees changes. So if I just come here and exit insert here mode and resume some of these components, what Creo Simulate Live will do is think for a moment, and then it will incorporate all these new components that we just added, all this stuff here. And we see our new results. So we see some stresses up here, for example. And so that's where Creo Simulate Live can be used in your workflow in your structural mode. Next thing we're going to do is talk about dynamic analysis. So I'm going to turn off our simulation here. And so if I come to add simulation, I can now select something like a modal analysis, right? And add this in. And what we're going to do is also re-suppress. So if I come back to my model tab, I'm going to re-suppress what I just added back here. We're going to look at the modal analysis of this original model here. So this is set up exactly like you would in Creo Simulate or an ANSYS simulation, where we could add some constraints. So we're going to add a fixed constraint here and here. And that's all we do for modal analyses. And so we can click Simulate. And we will see a modal simulation run once we give it a few minutes to run. We see the dark blue, again signifying that it's calculating, and now we see our results. So in Creo Simulate Live, we see we have a new drop-down. This is for the first 6 modes, which we're limited to in Creo Simulate Live. And if we click on them, we'll see their respective natural frequency. And we see right now it's still changing. It means it's still calculating a few things out, but it does level off as time goes on, or as your accuracy values changed. So if you set your accuracy bar to higher, these will reach a steadier value sooner. But they do reach a steady value. Right about now, they've reached their final values as calculated. And we see our natural frequencies. And so similar to our deformation, we could animate our deformation. So we come to mode 3 and animate it. And we could see how the model is shaking. Animate options. This one we don't get a true scale because of the nature of a modal analysis, but we can still exaggerate the scale and play with the speed as we see fit. And this comes to our conclusion for our modal analysis.
So now we're going to go into a thermal analysis, and what we have here is actually an engine block. So again, we have a lot of parts here, all shown here, and so we can click on Live Simulation to open up the tool. It takes a little bit to open. And what we'll actually see in this is that we already have a little bit of a simulation predefined on our model. So we have a thermal simulation here, and we already have a convection condition applied to the outside of the model. What I also want to come do is add in a heat flow option to the top here. We could change our unit still, change this as I want. So we're going to add in 1,000 watts. And we'll see this is added to our loads option. So our loads are heat flow and heat flux, and they'd show up here. Our boundary conditions are prescribed temperature or convection coefficient. Those are shown under the boundary conditions. So now if we click on simulate, what we'll see is a thermal simulation in our results. And we see our results pop up, and these are the steady state results. So this is something we can see in Creo's 4 to 7. We could just see everything. And again, we could change in our scale. So if we wanted to monitor everything between 150 and let's say 80, we could see that and see those results on our own unique scale. If I click refresh, we refresh them. Change our units. We can also look at the heat flux if we desire and change the units there. We also have the ability to do, if I turn off the simulation, inside of Creo 7 is come to transient thermal, and this enters in our transient mode. We can prescribe an initial temperature and say, this thing starts at 25 degrees Celsius and select everything. And that shows up as a boundary condition. We could also set a time limit. Initially, I'm going to set no time limit and click simulate. And what we'll see is the transient response. So everything starts at 25 Celsius, and we're going to see it grow from there given our boundary conditions. And so you can see it's kind of growing slowly, right? So this is at 0 seconds. And so we would need to let this run for a bit to get to our higher end temperatures. So I'm going to stop this again very quickly. So basically what we see here is the time and our heating of our model here. If I stop this, I can also add in a time limit. So if I want to make sure it doesn't, let's say we're only curious in the first 0.25 seconds, I can press OK to setting the time limit. And so if I click simulate here, and actually real quick, let me just set this to speed so we get our results. Let me click simulate. We'll see it go up until 0.25 and it will stop. And so we will only see our heating on our whole part between 0 and 0.25 seconds. And since our whole heating load's here, obviously this is what will be the hottest. We also have the ability, if we want to, if I unclick simulate and time limit, let's just set this to 5 seconds real quick. Click OK to set that. Simulate. We'll see it go. And if we watch the simulate and we see an interesting spot, we can click pause, and that will actually pause the timer, and we can go in and inspect our model at whatever step it's at. We cannot control the time steps. That's something that's internally being calculated, but we can pause it wherever and look at things, and then unclick pause, and it will resume. And again, we have a time limit of 5 seconds, so it will stop there. So that is our thermal simulation. Free up some more memory.
The last simulation we're going to take a look at is our CSL fluid simulation. So here we see we have a Royal Enfield motorcycle. What we're going to look at in this case is an internal flow from our engine and out our exhaust. So we're going to head over there to our exhaust pipe, which we rotate like this, and we're going to show a cross section so we can see the inside. Let's rotate that. There we go. And so we have to see what's going to happen is we have some flow come in from the left, come through here, and out the right. So we're going to come into live simulation. Now we're going to add a simulation and add a fluid simulation. And so now our ribbon changes for a fluid simulation, and our simulation tree updates with a fluid simulation that is active. So again, if you want to switch between them, you can just left click on simulations and click the little activate icon, and that will switch you. We're going to create an internal volume. So all Creo needs to create the internal flow volume are two bounding surfaces. So here and holding and here. And we see a internal volume will get created. We click OK. And now we have a fluid domain created. You can edit its material. And so by default, you get 6 materials, 6 fluids from Creo, or from PTC. You can add in new fluids as you want. If you click new and define out variables as you just defined. Or you can use carbon dioxide in this situation. Next thing we have to do is define out some boundary conditions. So as you'll see, our domain, our internal volume actually has surfaces created at the entrance and exit points. So we could come in here and define out our boundary conditions. So we have a velocity. We're also going to put a temperature on this end. So our exhaust is coming out of the engine around 700 Celsius. And let's say at the exit is going to be an outlet to the air. You can leave it at 0 or just type in atmospheric pressure, or say 101,325, or desired output pressure, whatever you decide there. We're going to deactivate our cross section. And now that this is all here, we're going to click simulate. And we're going to see our results in the fluid domain. So we're not going to see our geometry. It's just showing the fluid domain it has. And if we give it some time here to calculate out and run, we see our simulation will run. So again, this takes a little bit of time to run, and you're going to have to let your computer kind of go for a bit to reach a steady state. You can see in the top right, somewhat of the transient heat thermal simulations. We have a little stopwatch or a timer that's telling you what time the simulation is at. So right now, we haven't even hit 1/1000th of a second. So you do have to let these run, and the more complicated your geometry is, the longer you might have to let it run. Next thing we can do, we can add in things like cut planes. So if we wanted to see a cross section, we can do that. We can also add in direction fields. And we're going to move this. And so now we have our direction field. And lastly, one of my favorite features to use is the particles. So we actually release particles and see the flow in the internal volume. We can use the particle options and change actual parameters. So, we can lower their size, change the amount, or the cutoff point for how low volume we're looking for. So if you don't want to see the high-speed ones, we could turn down the max gate, change their transparency if you decide. And if we had something like an external simulation, flow of a car, we could release streamlines and see the aerodynamics and the flow around a car. So similar to the structural simulation, the real benefit of our flow simulation is that we can quickly change geometry and see the effects. So if we turn off the simulate, let's activate a cross-section. We actually come into some of these, into some of these extrusions. For example, extrude 7, we'll edit this to make it reach into here. And extrude this one. We're going to extend going into here. So now we've kind of changed our geometry. So if we rotate this to see it a bit better, we could possibly increased our airflow here. So now if we click simulate again, we'll notice that Creo Flow Analysis is able to pick up on those changes, and it will rightfully account for them in the simulation. So we see that pretty much instantly here, where it's showing the flows here. Another thing that's nice about Creo Simulate Live Fluids is we can still use the probe feature. So for example, if we wanted to look at the maximum velocity at our exit, we can do that and save it. And so we can monitor that, based on our internal changes, or possibly, if we just, change the outside or the inside diameter of this exhaust pipe, that would affect the velocity due to conservation of mass and things. So that is this whole functionality. Another thing I want to talk about is because we're in Creo 7 now, we have the ability to use multi-body design, right? So if we turn this off one more time, Creo Simulate Live will work with our multi-body design. So if we look at here, we can, suppress some of our body features and actually get rid and remove a body and use those features. You can also add in very unique geometries, and Creo Simulate Live will be able to handle it. So for example here, we need to select this geometry. To show our coordinate systems and points to align this lattice feature, which is what we're using to create some complex geometry. And so now we see we created a complicated honeycomb structure, right? A lot of holes, lots of geometry getting created there. And again, the real benefit to Creo Simulate Live is that automatically gets picked up, these changes. And what we'll see is that Creo Simulate Live really doesn't have a problem with how complicated or small holes those are in relation to the whole model size. It's going to be able to run the simulation. And again, if you were to let this go, this would simulate and you would see the steady state response of the flow. And again, by using the sliders like we showed earlier, you could use the slider to change the performance options of CSL fluids as you could in Creo, Simulate Live structure, thermal, anything. So those options are all still available to you. And so that kind of brings our demonstration portion of this to a close.
So here's my name and my email if you have technical questions about anything related to kind of simulation in general. If we have sales questions, that's also there. We also have a website, and this webinar will be on our YouTube channel later. So you can go on YouTube and just type in boundary systems, and our YouTube channel will pop up. We have a wide variety of videos related to Creo Simulation Live, Creo Simulate, and then also spanning multiple concepts, wind chill related things, manufacturing, mold flow, pretty much anything you could think of. If you have topics you would like to see, you could also send those emails to myself or sales, and we can schedule future webinars about what you would like to see. So now I'm going to open the floor to any questions. Okay, so that's good. Everyone can hear me. So does everyone have any questions regarding Creo Simulate Live? All right, well, it looks like there's no questions. So again, if you have any down the road, my email's right there. Please feel free to shoot me one, and we can discuss anything Creo Simulate Live or simulation related. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day and great rest of your week.